This episode of the History Guy brought to you by World of Warships. In the annals of naval warfare, few ships carry the weight of the name Warspite. Launched 110 years ago this month, HMS Warspite served 30 years as a commissioned ship, seeing her from the Battle of Jutland to the invasion of Normandy. She earned more battle honors than any other ship in the history of the Royal Navy. HMS Warspite's exploits have already featured in several episodes of the History Guy and could feature in several more, but perhaps the best way to understand the grand old lady is not through her battles and honors, but through the memories of the men who served aboard her. HMS Warspite is a Tier 6 battleship that you can play in the free-to-play game World of Warships, now available on PC. One of the best parts of the game is that you get to play actual historic vessels, rendered in accurate and loving detail. The game offers a virtual floating digital museum for people who appreciate naval history. And World of Warships' more than 40 unique maps and dynamic weather effects offer an even more enjoyable experience for a battleship like Warspite that served from the North Sea to the South Pacific. And of course, World of Warships lets you play more than battleships, but also cruisers, destroyers, aircraft carriers, and submarines. Each not just historically important and interesting, but also which offer unique challenges and advantages in fast, exciting, strategic gameplay. Since launch, World of Warships has added over 500 playable ships from 10 different nations. New content is released every month. Each week there is something new to experience with a steady cadence of new missions, game updates, and events to keep you and your friends engaged for hours on end. And did I mention that the game is also available on console? As an avid player of the game, I log on and play a game or two pretty much every day. I really enjoy World of Warships. It's a great mix of action and strategy and a homage to those great vessels of history. So go ahead and download the game using the link in the description today. And new players who are logging on, use the code Warships and you can get free doubloons, credits, premium playtime, and even a free ship after you complete 15 battles. Ordered in 1912 and launched November 26, 1913, HMS Warspite was a Queen Elizabeth-class super-dreadnought, one of 6 planned and the second to be launched. 634 foot 9 inches long and displacing 32,590 long tons, when the ship launched, Warspite was commonly described as the greatest of warships. Warspite's launching weight, 12,000 tons, was the heaviest of any warship ever launched at the time. The Plymouth, England Western Morning News extolled. Never before in the history of the British Navy has there been launched in a royal dockyard such a mass of material as will be seen gliding down the waves this afternoon. Commissioned on the 8th of March, 1915, Warspite was assigned to the 5th Battle Squadron, which had been constituted around the ships of the Queen Elizabeth class. Although only 4 of the ships of the class were in the squadron in May of 1916, for the largest naval engagement of the Great War, the Battle of Jutland. Owing to their speed, the battleships of the 5th Battle Squadron were temporarily assigned to the battle cruiser fleet under the command of Vice Admiral David Beatty. There they would see some of the hottest action of the battle. In the words of the men on board, provide a taste of what it was like to experience naval combat in the Great War. Commander Humphrey Walwyn was Warspite's executive officer, and during the battle was stationed between decks in general charge of all fire and repair parties. Excerpts of his journal were published in the 1921 book The Fighting at Jutland. 2:40 p.m. Message from the captain by messenger to get the hands up at once. At the same time a signal was brought to me. Cruiser in sight, bearing northeast, probably hostile. At once sounded off action and passed off word to everybody that we are in for the real thing. John Hazelwood was a gunnery officer in B turret. He recounted his experiences to the Imperial War Museum. My station was in B turret, and with the other members of the gun's crews we were ready, and we were looking forward to a chance to have a crack at the enemy. We were keen. This is the day we were waiting for, and the officer in charge of the turret was also excited at the chance that we'd got. Presently the order was given, bring the guns to the ready. The guns were brought to the ready, and we waited for the first bang. Bang went the first salvo, away to enemy, and off we started. Working in rhythm, the shells and the cordite coming up from below, being put in the guns, and they were kept firing as quick as possible. It was just a normal routine to the men in those turrets. They'd done it so often in practice that things just worked. From B turret, Walwyn rotored their first shots. Opened fire on light cruisers, range about 21,000 yards. Could see the fall of shot well, but could not see at all what we were firing at. While executing a turn, Warspite became the focus of fire from the German fleet. Walwyn wrote, I suddenly saw on the starboard quarter the whole of the high seas fleet. At least I saw mast, funnels, and endless ripples of orange flashes all down the line. How many I didn't try to count, as we were getting well strafed at the time. But I remember counting up to 8. The noise of their shells over and over was deafening, that frightful crack, crack, crack going on the whole time. Felt 1 or 2 very heavy shakes, but didn't think very much of it at the time, and it never occurred to me that we were being hit. Sent by the captain to assess damage and direct repair crews, there he was witness to the damage from the 15 hits from large shells that Warspite took that day. He described golden flame, stink, impenetrable dust. Describing one shell hit, he wrote, center line armored door was blown off its hinges, and whole of after flat in an awful state, everything blown to pieces and splattered by splinters. The resin out of cortisine makes everything a horrid state of black, sticky, glue-like stuff when hit by shell fire. One shell had struck particularly close to home. He wrote, went aft again and found that my cabin had been completely removed overboard. In the middle of this heap was my wife's miniature without its case, but otherwise perfect. In the midst, the crew kept a semblance of humor. He recalled a 12-inch shell came into the galley and blew down through the deck. A stoker alongside me looked up and said, there goes my dinner. He was called back above deck because of a fire, writing, a fragment of shell had come through the roof battery deck and hit the after 6-inch cordite case, containing 4 charges. As bad luck would have it, the cartridge number had a charge half out of the case in his arms, having just received the order to load. The box and 4 others exploded. Surveying damage, he wrote, the upper deck and superstructures looked perfectly awful, holed everywhere. Everything in the 4 superstructure was wrecked, and it looked like a burnt-out factory, all blackened and beams twisted everywhere. He looked out through a hole in the armor in the ship's side and said everything looked red, lurid, and beastly, heavy firing all around and splashes everywhere. Amid the carnage, he noted a strange request. 2 stokers came to me and begged me when I was very busy, and begged me to take watches, letters, etc., found on men who had been knocked out. It struck me as incongruous, as if it mattered a bit, when we might all of us go any minute. Amidst the damage, he wrote, the noise was perfectly appalling. You couldn't hear it all between decks, and the worst of it was, one knew nothing. In B turret, Hazelwood had no idea of the damage. He recalled, now in these turrets that hold these guns, you're simply in a steel box. The box completely surrounds you with thick armor plating all around. One feels that while you are in these turrets, and you are naturally cut off from anything going on outside, except the fact that you are in telephone communication with the bridge and the control towers. With Warspite retreating, he finally got to see the state of the ship. I come out from the top of the manhole on top of the gun turret, and I was amazed at what I saw. Part of the bridge was alight, which consisted of a storage of life belts. They were still all in flames. I could see that the 6-inch battery, there was a fire raging there from the cordite. The upper deck was riddled with shell, and not a boat was fit to be put in the water. From there I went down to the captain's cabin and was amazed at the shambles. I picked up at the door my captain's military medals, as an example, which had come from a cupboard on the side. And there was also, in parts of the stern, 2 and 3 foot of water in compartments. Junior Medical Officer Surgeon Lieutenant Gordon Ellis made a similar observation. Only a few hours before, Warspite had been one of the cleanest and smartest-looking ships in the fleet, her decks spotlessly white, and her light gray paint, freshly put on only recently, gleaming everywhere in the sunshine. Now her decks were filthy, littered with debris and in places torn up by shells. One of the quarter-deck ladders had been blown away, her funnels had ragged holes in them. The small iron ladder on X turret had been bent and twisted and broken away from its lower supports, whilst the side of the turret was covered with marks from a glancing hit. After fighting fires, rescuing trapped crew, and addressing flooding, Walwyn finally was able to seek food. In the mess he noticed, a funny bit there. 6-inch shell had come through the wardroom table, making a clean round hole, dented deck, and gone out through the other side, having wrecked stove, armchair, and piano. We hope to sell the piano for a good price as a souvenir, although it has no inside left, but the outside is all right. Casualties were somewhat light, given the damage, 14 killed and 16 wounded. Warspite had been hit so hard that the German press insisted that the ship had been sunk, and that was understandable, while one noted that no doubt they could not see us for spray, splashes, and smoke. And Captain Edward Philpotts told the press, the fact that we got out was an absolute miracle. Despite budgetary concerns and naval treaty limits, the Queen Elizabeths were retained and modernized between the wars, and Warspite would see action yet again. Wally Shaw was a radio man aboard Warspite and wrote an account of his experiences that was published as HMS Warspite, My Memories of World War II in 2012. I had trouble finding my way around the ship via a complex series of passageways and stairs, which were steel and sometimes slippery. The toilets were referred to as heads, and they were forward, and one deck below the forecastle, and usually noisy and smelly. The tables, forms, and floor were usually scrubbed most days and before rounds. It seemed that everyone was always on the move, doing something, the motto being, "A busy ship is a happy ship." On April 13th, 1940, Warspite and several Royal Navy destroyers engaged a group of German destroyers off the Norwegian port of Narvik. There, Stephen Roscoe writes in his 1997 book HMS Warspite, The Story of a Famous Battleship, Warspite fired her main armament in earnest for the first time since the Battle of Jutland. Roscoe quotes Petty Officer Daniel Reardon, a gunner's mate on A turret. "My own crew are on the forecastle for a smoke. Some wag rolls a snowball and one of turret B's crews gets hit in the neck. This is a general signal for a snow fight between the two turrets, when action station sounds. Then enemy in sight, and the sight setters can't the ranges. It's just a practice shot. Our guns are nearly horizontal, so the range must be short. Then the ding-ding of the fire going. The right gun moves a little, comes steady, and there's a woof, which rocks the turret. The left gun is now at the ready and fires while the right gun is reloading. B turret, firing over our heads, blows away our blast bags, and the turret fills with smoke, like London on a November night. The turret officer calls out, 'Tell the crew we have hit a destroyer, and she is burning nicely.' Lieutenant Commander William Wentworth Stuart Fitzroy, the air defense officer, had, Roscoe writes, a grandstand view of the proceedings. We belted along at high speed with the destroyers doing magnificent work ahead of us. The roar of our 15-inch guns reverberated from the steep, snow-covered sides of the fjord, but the explosions of the enemy torpedoes, when they hit the rocks, were even greater. Fortunately, the enemy was prevented from firing across our track, and all the torpedoes ran parallel and so missed. Tall columns of smoke soon marked the positions where the big German destroyers had met their end, and we passed quite close to one beached or burning wreck after another. Captain Crutchley jutted his beard out, removed his pipe from his mouth, and said to Admiral Whitworth, 'Just like shelling peas, sir.' 3 German destroyers were sunk by Warspite and the destroyers with her, and 5 more had to be scuttled by their crews after they ran out of ammunition or fuel. After Norway, Warspite would serve in the Mediterranean, where Admiral Andrew Cunningham would give her the nickname, the Grand Old Lady. Shaw wrote, "One morning when I awoke, I knew the ship had stopped and anchored. When I came on deck, the sun was shining, and before me lay the beautiful city of Alexandria." Fighting in the July 1940 Battle of Calabria, the subject of another episode of the History Guy, Warspite hit the Italian battleship Leo Cesare at a range of more than 26,000 yards, one of the longest-range naval artillery hits in history. Shaw recalled, "We got within 20 miles of an Italian battleship, which opened fire on us. One of her 16-inch shells dropped close on our port side and another close to our starboard side. According to gunnery experts, the next should have hit us. However, we opened fire with our 15-inch shells and hit the enemy quarterdeck." Of the confusing 1941 night battle of Cape Matapan, Shaw wrote, "Suddenly there was a great bang, and the message box was pushed off the bulkhead. The fleet wireless officer was in the office at the time, and he said, 'It's all right, it's us.' I then asked through the speaking tube, 'What's going on out there on the bridge?' And the reply was, 'You've never seen anything like it. We've just seen an Italian cruiser opened up, as if by a tin opener. Stand by for another bang.' And the cause of the smoke and flame coming into the remote control office was that the 15-inch guns were all turned broadside, and it was the flash of all 4 guns being so near. Those guns would receive the honor of being the first to open fire on June 6th, 1944, where, along with HMS Ramillies, Warspite supported the troops of the British 3rd Division, landing at Sword Beach on D-Day. A January 2020 edition of the National Interest quotes Petty Officer Charles Pearson. "At that moment, there was a lull in the shelling, and we came out of the turret to see what was happening. Around us, other ships were still firing, the Ramillies banging away with her own 15-inch guns, the rocket ships letting rip. Then we saw the gliders coming over, heard the captain's broadcast, and saw the aircraft doing the V for Victory formation. It was fantastic. So much noise. It was awesome." HMS Warspite fired her guns in earnest for the last time on November 1st, 1944, in support of the Allied invasion of the Dutch island of Walcheren. Counting Jutland, she'd been a part of 15 major actions. She was the most decorated ship in the history of the Royal Navy. Decommissioned in 1945, she had been in commission for 30 years. Her motto had been Belli Duro Despicio, Latin for I despise the hardships of war. Few ships in history endured more such hardships. In April of 1947, Warspite was being towed to Scotland to be broken up when she was caught in a storm, broke her tow lights, and was grounded off the coast of Cornwall. Several attempts to refloat her failed, and she had to be scrapped in place, and today there's a memorial near where she was finally scrapped. A person who had seen her the night that she broke her tow line said, "There were high winds and powerful seas, and none could hold her." Roskell called it a last splendid gesture of defiance.
Remember, download World of Warships using the link in the description. Use the promo code Warships to get free to blues, credits, premium playtime, and a free ship after you complete 15 battles.
I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.